Dedicated dials for black and white must mean the recipes are good, right? Unlike the endless options in color editing, black and white comes down to 6 settings. The OM3 and ZF can change these in camera, all but 2. After changing 1 setting at a time across 5 photo walks day and night, I set up JPEG recipes plus 2 monochrome raw file presets. How do they compare against Fujifilm's Acros or the true monochrome from Leica? Are these dials just a gimmick? Hello, I'm Jack, this is Bokeh Therapy, and tweaking 1 setting at a time is how I made a black and white look for both the ZF and OM3. Actually, 2 looks. Although neither may be to your taste, hopefully my workflow can help you find yours. Black and white settings 1 and 2 are sharpness and contrast. I like to turn down both. Most cameras interpret these settings too aggressively. Finer details already pop more in monochrome than they do in color. On this first daytime monochrome photo walk, I'm testing my ZF versus the X-T3. My tried and true Acros recipe is on screen. Even with these settings dialed down, everything else set to default. I can add contrast in camera through the composition. I'm shooting at noon, the light is at its harshest overhead position, light and shadows are easy to find in geometry. A tiny hint of that fun ho look. I still remember the first time I saw a fun ho image. Dramatic lighting, sprawling scene so full of curiosity. But at 95, Fun Ho's imagination had faded. He'd already won every conceivable prize, so when he followed his family to San Francisco, he left photography behind. When the thing that once energized you starts to drain you, what else is there left to do? On the Nikon ZF, there are 3 monochrome profiles. I went for deep tone monochrome to see how close it looks to Acros. There's more fine tuning available on the ZF and camera compared to Fuji when it comes to sharpening, mid-tone sharpening, clarity. I use the quick sharp setting to -1, contrast to -1 too. You can see these recipes look quite different. It's not just the exposure. Both cameras were set to matrix metering, exposure compensation, -0.3, but the most notable difference is a setting you can't change on the ZF. Black and white setting 3. Grain. A natural combination, Fujifilm lets you apply different strengths and is not yet available on the ZF. For now, you'll need to add it in Lightroom or crank the ISO past 6400. Deep monochrome on the ZF looks more digital without it. Maybe that's why out of the 110 creative recipes on Nikon's imaging cloud, only 4 so far are black and white. How about the OM3? They're rather famous for their monochrome JPEGs. ZF's a new player in comparison, and on the OM3 you can add 3 different film grain options. The weakest grain setting looks the most organic to me. On the second photo walk, I'm using a 17mm on the OM3, 23mm on the X-T3 for that 35mm neutral perspective. But the OM3's monochrome rendering is anything but neutral. Its mono JPEGs with sharpness and contrast to -1 look closer to Fuji's Acros than Nikon's deep tone monochrome. It's not just a grain. The highlight roll-off crop sensors, micro four thirds or APS-C, more closely match each other than the full-frame ZF. Yet this weakness becomes a strength for urban monochrome settings. Less dynamic range means both bright and dark quickly disappear into highlight or shadow, letting the geometry of the scene come to the foreground. If you prefer a more subtle, nuanced look, it comes down to separation in the midtones, and you can get this in camera through color contrast. Opposing tones on the color wheel will create different tones of gray in the middle of the histogram, while the extreme whites and blacks fall on either side. Look, this is much easier to do in Lightroom if you shoot RAW. Doing this for JPEGs and camera is hard unless your camera has black and white setting for curves. So much more control. Fuji lets you control the highlight and shadow, but the OM3 does one better. You can affect the midtones. This is where the look varies wildly based on your taste. I love a good crunchy S-curve for an urban look, but to better match the lenses I'm using on this third photo walk, the Panasonic 25mm 1.4 on the OM3, and on my Leica M11 monochrome, the 50 1.4 Summilux, I want a nostalgic low contrast vibe. A gentle fade to lift the tones, highlight, midtones, shadows, all +3 on the OM3, but you don't buy an M11 monochrome to shoot JPEG. In fact, the in-camera JPEG settings on the Leica are a bit of a joke, just sharpness and contrast. Now what you're seeing on these Leica images is the first of my 2 free monochrome Lightroom presets for RAW files. You don't need a Leica. RAW files on either the OM3 or ZF work as long as you use the Adobe monochrome camera profile as the base. This is free to download on my website or direct to your inbox via this week's Bokeh Therapy newsletter. It's inevitable that these smaller sensors have a harsher highlight roll-off, but that's probably the most noticeable thing. And at this point, I was 3 photo walks in, juggling 4 cameras or shooting monochrome, and I'm happy to report the black and white dial isn't a gimmick. At least, not to me, because my biggest fear in photography, apathy. The thing that energizes me most right now might one day start to drain me. I might appear to be obsessed about gear, my photos are middling, but I'm treating every photo walk as a privilege. Just like fun ho, it's not a guarantee I'll always find this fun, and being able to change the shooting experience in camera with a flick of a switch is appealing. Funho did find another outlet eventually, ironically in editing, and my first monochrome preset isn't my go-to look for street. It's more flattering for portraits, the lifted tones, a touch of grain, but it can work for street if you change black and white setting 5, color filters. My favorite's the red filter during the day. It blocks blue and green light, which is the majority of the daytime light, so everything looks more dramatic. The OM3 gives you the most flexibility for different strengths of color filters. Alongside a rotatable color wheel, it's really neat, the most precise control of color filters for monochrome out of any camera I've tested. The Leica M11 monochrome doesn't interpret color, it has a monochrome only sensor, so the way to do this is with a physical red filter, which I didn't have on this photo walk, so you can see for yourself the difference in perceived contrast Leica versus the OM3's red filter monochrome recipe. On the ZF, you can apply color filters to any of the monochrome settings, but what about curves? You can't do this in camera on the ZF. All you can do is tweak a global brightness setting. I hope this is coming in the next ZF firmware update, but on my 4th monochrome photo walk, this time at night, I did apply a curve to these ZF JPEGs. This is that gentle fade that lifts the tones gradually. I had to go into NX Studio under Picture Control and adjust the custom tone curve there. It's a raw editor, so you can add more points to the curve than the in-camera controls on the OM3, and of course I like the output of the ZF better. This uses flat monochrome rather than deep tone monochrome as the base. I exported it as a recipe file that you can save on your SD card and load onto the ZF as a JPEG recipe. For most people, this is quicker and easier to do than going via Imaging Cloud. This recipe is free for everyone to download, just like everything else in this video. This recipe works well for nighttime photography. It was very dark along the river when I was shooting. And this recipe avoids underexposing, limits the noise hidden in the shadows, as long as you shoot with an exposure compensation of 0 or plus 0.3. The dedicated monochrome sensor on the Leica has more dynamic range, but after processing, they look pretty similar across these two full frame options. I like this look a lot coming out of the ZF. I was shooting wide open on the Nikon 40mm f2 to get as much light into the sensor in the near pitch black surroundings. And this is where you can't beat the Leica M11 monochrome. I was shooting at f5.6 f8, zone focusing a 35mm lens in the middle of the night. Unbelievable. High ISO performance. I didn't need to use the rangefinder patch to focus. TT Artisan's new optical viewfinder is bigger and brighter. Its 35mm frame lines make composing very easy. It secures onto the hot shoe very tightly. It's a great fit for the slew of new cameras that don't ship with an EBF, perhaps a Nikon ZR or a Panasonic S9, Fuji XM5, anything you can pair a 35mm lens with. But the gentle fade recipe didn't work as well on my fifth and last monochrome photo walk near the city CBD at night. This curve tends to overexpose those bright neon lights and makes the whole scene a little too flat. So my second black and white recipe uses an S-curve for more crunch. On the OM3, highlights +4, midtone 0, shadows -4. On the ZF, this crunchy recipe applies an S-curve in NX Studio. I'm back using deep tone monochrome as the base, not flat monochrome or monochrome, but the biggest factor for this look comes down to black and white setting 6, lens choice. While monochrome hides the lens's purple fringing, its sharpness and micro contrast are on full display. The ZF with the 85mm 1.8S is a super sharp combo. The image is contrasty and crisp before any recipes applied. I'm shooting with a mystery lens on the OM3, and it could be the deeper depth of field on the smaller micro four thirds sensor playing tricks on my eyes, but it looks sharper than a Nikon 85. The same scene, similar S-curve and settings as the ZF, it gives off a different look. Even the ZF's contrastiest deep tone monochrome look renders the midtones with more gradation and subtlety than the OM3. This still holds true when shooting RAW on both cameras, applying my S-curve as a monochrome Lightroom preset to both. I still can't quite match the look of the monochrome output, even with all the controls RAW editing affords you. Choosing the right lens to get the look in camera does more than half the work for you in black and white. And what surprised me was I had just as much fun figuring out these presets as I did out on those photo walks. And that's how Fun Ho rounded out the rest of his career in San Francisco, re-editing, resequencing his older work from Hong Kong. New exhibitions, brand new photo books, it's how most of us in the West found out about his work. I'll do whatever it takes to keep things fun. I want a camera always beside me. And if any of my presets make things easier for you too, that's a win-win. The OM3's recipes, 2 downloadable ZF recipes to load on your SD card, and 2 monochrome Lightroom RAW file presets, Mono Fade and Mono Crunch. These recipes save me time. I have to go on a last-minute trip next week. And the mystery lens, which is the OM45 1.2 Pro and the OM3 this time, will be the centerpiece of my travel kit. You'll find that video here when I get back from my trip. I'm Jack. This is Bokeh Therapy.